The Gentleman's Grace. Chapter 1. A proposal most peculiar. Miss Susan Gray had never expected to be remembered. At 19, she had mastered the art of being politely present and quietly unremarkable, an agreeable figure in pale colours who could be relied upon to thank hostesses, praise musicians, and never say anything that might invite attention. She was not ugly, she was not stupid. She was not even dull, if anyone had cared to discover it. But in a world where sparkle was mistaken for worth, Susan's gentleness made her nearly invisible. She had been educated respectably, French, pianoforte, a little drawing. But her father's death and the modest state of the Gray finances meant she came into society without the glittering armour of a large dowry. Beauty without money was admired. Modest looks without money were ignored. Modest looks with modest money were simply endured. So she endured. She attended balls with the same quiet resignation she brought to family dinners, where cousins discussed fortunes they expected to inherit. She arrived, curtsied, smiled, accepted lemonade, and stood close to the wall as though the wallpaper might adopt her. That evening, Lady Fernham's ball marked the beginning of the season in earnest. Chandeliers blazed like captured suns. Every surface gleamed with polish and expectation. The air carried a sweet muddle of perfume, wax and heated silk. Musicians played a country dance bright enough to lift even the most reluctant foot. Susan wore a simple gown of soft blue muslin, fresh, neat, and entirely insufficient beside the jewel-toned splendour around her. Her aunt, Mrs. Margaret Gray, served as chaperone in the strictest sense of the word, though she performed her duties with the weary detachment of a woman who had decided society was a young person's sport. "There," her aunt said, steering her toward an arrangement of palms. "Stand in a place where you are not underfoot. If anyone wishes to dance with you, they will find you." Susan, well trained in disappointment, offered the correct answer. "Yes, aunt." Mrs. Gray settled herself on a chair and within minutes entered a light doze, her reticule clasped like a shield. Susan watched the room, watched laughter flash, watched fans flutter, watched young men gather courage to approach girls whose eyes promised delight. She watched mothers assess, fathers calculate, sisters compete. She watched, as she always did, from the edges. At the centre, beautiful Miss Cecilia Harrowby collected compliments the way she collected ribbons, effortlessly, carelessly, with a smile that suggested she had been born sure of her own value. Nearby, Lady Arabella Winton was already on her third dance, her laughter ringing as bright as the chandeliers. Gentlemen hovered like bees. Susan's dance card remained a blank square of humiliation. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she preferred peace. She told herself a quiet life would suit her far better than the bustle of admiration. Then the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, like the turning of a tide. Heads turned, whispers thickened. A line of laughter erupted from one corner, then subsided into eager murmurs. Susan followed the motion, her heart inexplicably tightening. Lord Benedict Vale had arrived. His entrance did not require announcement, it simply demanded attention. He moved with the ease of a man who expected the world to part for him, and it did. Ladies watched him over fans, eyes bright with curiosity and caution. Mammas narrowed their gazes, already preparing to tighten their daughters' reins. Gentlemen smirked as though scandal were a sport, and Benedict Vale was the most entertaining player. Susan had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. He was said to have danced his way through half the debutantes of the last 3 seasons and broken hearts without remorse. He was said to be clever, charming, and completely unfit for respectable marriage. He was whispered about with the sort of fascination reserved for fires, dangerous, mesmerizing, and oddly warming from a safe distance. Susan should have been indifferent. She was not. He wore midnight blue, tailored to perfection. His dark hair had a natural wave that made him appear as though he had risen from some romantic painting rather than a gentleman's dressing room. His face carried the handsome arrogance of men who had never doubted their power. But his eyes were alert, discerning, and entirely too alive. He spoke to Lady Fernham, bowing with an elegance that made the gesture seem both sincere and wickedly charming. He offered a few words to an older duke, coaxing a reluctant smile. He greeted a group of gentlemen, laughter rolling from them as if pulled by his presence. And then, as Susan reminded herself she was merely watching an interesting spectacle, his gaze swept the room and stopped, directly on her. Susan's stomach dropped. Her first thought was that he must be looking past her, toward someone far more dazzling behind. She turned her head slightly. No one stood there. She looked back. Lord Benedict Vale's mouth curved, slow and deliberate, into a smile that struck her like warmth across cold fingers. And then he began to cross the floor. Susan's pulse hammered. She did not know whether to flee, to curtsy, or to pretend she had not noticed his approach. She did what she always did under pressure. She froze. He reached her corner with the calm confidence of a man who had never doubted his welcome anywhere. "You look as though you intend to bolt," he said lightly. "I beg you will not. It would make my approach decidedly awkward." Susan's voice came out thin. "My lord, I think you may be mistaken." Mistaken. He placed a hand over his heart in mock pain. "Miss Grey, I am wounded. I assure you I know precisely where I have chosen to stand." "How do you know my name?" she blurted, then immediately wished the floor would swallow her. His eyes flickered with amusement, but not cruelty. "Because I am not entirely foolish, because I have eyes, and because you are not as invisible as you believe." She stared, unprepared for that. He inclined his head. "Lord Benedict Vale." "I know," she said, then flushed. "That is, everyone knows." "Ah." His smile sharpened. "Do you mean everyone knows the truth, or everyone knows the rumours?" "I dash." He extended his hand. "May I have the honour of this dance, Miss Grey?" Susan looked instinctively toward her aunt, who was still half asleep. She looked around the room as though searching for someone to correct this error. No correction came. "My lord," she managed, I do not believe—" "You do not believe what?" "That you truly wish to dance with me." His expression softened just a fraction. "I do. Come." Some part of her, a part she had suppressed for years, rose in defiance. If she said no, she would remain what she had always been. If she said yes, well, she might still be overlooked, but at least she would have stepped out of the shadow for a moment. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. "Very brave," Benedict murmured, leading her forward. "Now, do not look as though you are headed to your own execution." "That would be difficult," she whispered, "considering I feel precisely so." He laughed, low and warm. "Then allow me to rescue you. Think of me as a villain." "A hero," he corrected. Susan's lips twitched. "That seems unlikely." "Unlikely, yes," he agreed, "but perhaps not impossible." They joined the dance. Benedict guided her with such assured steadiness that her initial panic eased. He did not whirl her too fast. He did not force her into bravado. He moved as though he understood that confidence could be coaxed, not demanded. At the end of the set, Susan's cheeks were flushed, not from humiliation, but from the exertion of having been treated like someone worth dancing with. "You dance well," he said. "I do not." "You do. You simply doubt yourself. Doubt is the enemy of grace." Susan looked down. "I have had practice." "With family," he guessed. "With cousins who step on your toes and laugh it off." She blinked. "How?" I notice things, he reminded her. He escorted her to the side, not to abandon her, but to stand beside her in a manner that turned her corner into a place of interest. And then, shockingly, he said, "Miss Grey, would you like to become the toast of the season?" Susan's breath caught. "Me?" "Yes, you. Not Miss Harrowby. Not Lady Arabella. You." "That is absurd. It is only absurd because you have accepted mediocrity as your fate." "I have accepted reality." Benedict's gaze held hers, suddenly intense. "Reality can be rearranged, Miss Grey. Sometimes all it requires is a hand placed correctly, here at the right moment, to pull someone forward." "Why?" she whispered, the question trembling at the edge of courage. "Why would you help me?" His smile returned, but the playfulness did not fully cover something deeper. "Because the ton bores me. Because I enjoy challenges. And because you—" He paused, as though choosing his words with unexpected care. "Because you look like someone who has spent too long shrinking. I dislike waste." The word stung, even as it warmed her. Waste. As though she were a precious thing left forgotten. "What would it require?" she asked, before she could talk herself out of it. "A few lessons," he said. "A willingness to be coached, and trust." "You are a notorious rake," she whispered. He did not deny it. He merely said, "I am also a man who knows what makes this world pay attention. You may despise the rules, but they exist whether you approve or not. Allow me to teach you how to use them." "And what will you gain?" Susan pressed. Benedict's eyes gleamed. "The satisfaction of proving society wrong." "About what?" "About you," he said, quietly enough that it felt like a secret. Susan's throat tightened. This was reckless. It was improper. It was certainly the sort of thing her mother would have forbidden, were her mother still alive. And yet Benedict Vale stood before her offering something she had never dared to want, the chance to be seen. Susan drew in a slow breath. "I accept," she said. Benedict's smile was sudden and brilliant, as though he had won something he had not expected to desire. "Excellent," he murmured. "Then we begin tomorrow." And in that moment, Miss Susan Grey stepped out of her corner without realizing she had also stepped into the most dangerous part of Lord Benedict Vale's heart. Chapter 2. Lessons in Confidence. Benedict Vale discovered within a week that transforming Miss Susan Grey was not a project. It was a complication. He had approached her at Lady Fernham's ball with a half-formed impulse, a desire to do something interesting, perhaps even charitable in a reckless way. He had expected gratitude, timid obedience, and the simple satisfaction of watching society blink in surprise. He had not expected intelligence. Susan listened carefully. She remembered everything. She asked questions, not foolish ones, but thoughtful, quietly sharp ones that revealed a mind used to observing. He had not expected humour either, subtle and dry, arriving when she felt safe enough to let it show. And he had certainly not expected the way her sincerity unsettled him. His own world was built on masks. He wore charm like a coat, and flirtation like a weapon. He did not allow anyone close enough to ask what lay beneath, yet Susan, without even trying, seemed to see too much. Their first lesson took place in Hyde Park. It was safe, public, proper. Her aunt sat on a bench, knitting with grim determination. Benedict maintained a respectable distance, though his voice carried easily. "You walk like an apology," he observed. Susan stiffened. "I do not." "You do," he said, unrepentant. "Your shoulders tuck inward as though you fear bumping into someone's opinion." "That is absurd." "Is it? Most people in London do not bump into opinions. They are flattened by them." She frowned, then, surprisingly, laughed. "You speak as though you despise society." I do, Benedict said, yet you thrive in it. I thrive in storms too, he returned. That does not mean I enjoy being struck by lightning. Susan's smile faded into something thoughtful. And yet, you seem never struck. His gaze met hers. You would be surprised. He gestured. Stand there, feet steady, shoulders back, chin lifted, not arrogant, simply sure. Susan complied, though her movements were cautious. Like this? Better, Benedict said. He circled her, not like a predator, but like a craftsman assessing a sculpture. Now, imagine you have every right to occupy space. Her hands fluttered. I do occupy space. No, he corrected. You exist in it. Different thing. Susan's cheeks warmed. How does one occupy space? By believing you deserve it. She swallowed. And what if one does not believe that? Then one learns, Benedict said softly. We are not born confident. We are taught, sometimes cruelly by being denied. But confidence can be taught kindly too. Susan looked at him as though startled by kindness from a man like Benedict Vale. What? He asked lightly. I did not expect you to be. She hesitated. Human, he suggested. Yes, she admitted, then immediately looked embarrassed. Forgive me, that was not... I am human, Benedict said, a wry edge to his voice. Regrettably so. They walked slowly. Benedict taught her the art of acknowledging acquaintances, a nod, a small smile, an air of ease. He explained that people were drawn to those who seemed content with themselves. Men, he told her, are especially foolish creatures. They want what seems just out of reach. So I must behave as though I am unreachable? Not unkind, he corrected, merely not desperate. Desperation is what society expects from a wallflower, and expectation is dull. Surprise them. Susan lifted her brows. You speak as though I am a performance. In London, Benedict said, everyone is a performance. The tragedy is that most people forget they can choose the script. She considered that in silence. The next lesson took place at Susan's modiste, where Benedict, at her aunt's insistence, waited in the anteroom while Susan tried on gowns. When Susan emerged, she looked uneasy. This is too much, she whispered. Benedict's eyes swept over her with quick professional assessment. The gown was still modest, but the shade, soft green, made her skin glow, her eyes brighter. The cut sharpened her waist without becoming indecent. It suited her. It is not too much, he said. It will draw attention. That is the point. Susan's fingers twisted. I do not know how to bear it. Benedict stepped closer, lowering his voice. You bear it by remembering. Attention is not a verdict. It is merely a gaze. You may choose what it means. She looked up. You speak as though you understand fear. His jaw tightened, so briefly she almost missed it. I understand it, he said, then smiled as though nothing had been revealed. Now, turn. Let us see if your new gown is prepared for battle. Battle? The season, he said. It eats the unprepared. Susan's eyes widened, then her lips curved faintly. Then I suppose I must become prepared. Benedict found himself smiling back, and the sensation was strangely unfamiliar, too genuine. Their first true test arrived at Almack's. Almack's was not merely a ballroom. It was a tribunal, a place where patronesses decided who would be welcomed and who would be quietly erased. Susan had attended before, always clinging to the edges. This time, she entered on Benedict's arm. The effect was immediate. Heads turned, fans paused. Conversation flickered into whisper. Susan's spine stiffened. Breathe, Benedict murmured. They are staring. Let them. But they will stare whether you hide or shine, he said. At least give them something worth staring at. Susan's hand tightened around her reticule. I do not know if I can. Benedict paused, subtly shifting so his body shielded her from the sharpest gazes. Yes, you can. She glanced up. How do you know? Because I am watching you, he thought. Because I have seen what you are. Because something in me wants you to succeed more than it has ever wanted anything to succeed. He did not say that. Instead he said, because I have decided you will. They moved into the room. Benedict greeted a patroness with effortless charm. He introduced Susan with formal respect. Miss Grey, Lady Osborne said coolly, eyes measuring. How charming. Susan's instinct was to shrink. Benedict's hand tightened lightly at her elbow, a steadying pressure. Susan smiled, not timidly, not desperately, just warmly. How kind of you, Lady Osborne, she said. It is a pleasure to be here again. Again, as though she belonged, as though she had always belonged. Lady Osborne's brows lifted. Indeed. They moved on. Benedict leaned close. Perfect. Susan exhaled shakily. I thought I would faint. You did not, no. And you will not, he said. Now, one dance, only one. We begin slowly. Susan nodded, heart pounding. They joined a waltz. Benedict's hand found her waist, properly placed, firm enough to guide. Susan moved stiffly at first, then steadied as his rhythm carried her. He spoke softly, anchoring her with quiet commentary. Do not look at the floor. I am afraid of stepping. Look at me, he said simply. Susan lifted her gaze. For a moment, the crowd vanished. There was only Benedict's face, handsome, confident, and unexpectedly focused on her with a kind of intensity that made her breath catch. You are doing well, he murmured. I am terrified. And yet you are doing well, he repeated. The dance ended. Benedict bowed and escorted her to the side. Before Susan could retreat, a young gentleman, baronet perhaps, approached with eager boldness. Miss Grey, he said, may I request the next set? Susan froze. Benedict kept his expression neutral, though something in his chest tightened. It is your choice, he said softly. Susan looked at the baronet. Then she looked at Benedict, and something in her eyes steadied. Yes, she said, I would be pleased. The baronet beamed. Benedict forced himself to step back. Go, he murmured. Susan went. Benedict watched her dance with another man, and to his shock, he felt a sharp, irrational flare of jealousy. He had not expected that. He had expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt loss. As the evening continued, Susan danced again and again. Gentlemen began to approach her not out of pity, but curiosity. She laughed, not loudly, but freely. She held conversation with a grace that made her seem astonishingly interesting. Women watched her with narrowed eyes, men watched her with interest, and Benedict Vale, who had always believed himself immune to foolishness, watched her and realized with cold clarity that he was falling into something he had never meant to approach. When the final dance ended, he escorted her back to her aunt. You were magnificent, he said quietly. Susan's cheeks glowed. Because of you. No, Benedict said, voice rougher than he intended. Because of you. She hesitated, then said softly, Lord Benedict, why are you doing this? He could not tell her the truth, that in helping her he had found himself wanting to be better, if only in her eyes. That her sincerity made him feel unclean, as though his reputation were suddenly something to be ashamed of rather than wielded. So he gave her the safest part of the truth. "Because you deserve to be happy," he said. Susan's gaze held his. "And do you, my lord? Do you deserve happiness?" The question struck too close. Benedict's smile came too quickly. "I require nothing. That is not an answer." He bowed. "Good night, Miss Grey." He turned away before she could see what her question had awakened. But all the way home, Benedict Vale could not stop hearing her words. Do you deserve happiness? He had never asked himself. Now, he could not stop. Chapter 3. The Rogue Who Fell. By mid-season, Miss Susan Grey had become a name people said twice. At morning calls, ladies remarked on her gowns, tasteful yet flattering, as though she had discovered colour and confidence at once. At concerts, gentlemen angled for seats near her. At soirées, hostesses began to speak of her as though she had always been part of their inner circle. Susan's transformation was not loud. It did not involve wild flirtation or scandalous daring. It was quieter and far more dangerous. She had become self-possessed. And that, Benedict realized, was irresistible. He should have been pleased. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he found himself suffering. Every time another gentleman approached Susan, Benedict felt his jaw tighten. Every time he heard her laugh at someone else's jest, he felt a strange, sharp emptiness. He had taught her to be admired, and now he had to watch admiration gather around her like a storm. He began, unwillingly, to avoid her. He arrived late to events. He claimed headaches. He made excuses. Susan noticed. Of course she noticed. Susan noticed everything. One afternoon in the park, she slowed her steps beside him. Her aunt, for once, walked ahead, distracted by a friend. "My lord," Susan said quietly, "have I displeased you?" Benedict blinked, thrown. "Displeased me?" "You have been distant." He attempted a smile. "Perhaps I have been busy." "With what?" "With trying not to love you," he thought. Instead, he said, "With my own affairs." Susan's eyes searched his face. "I thought I had become your project." The word stung him. Project. Had it been? Once, perhaps. Not now. "You have become your own triumph," Benedict said. Susan's lips parted, as though she wanted to say something. She hesitated. Then she spoke, softly, as though stepping onto thin ice. "I did not want merely to be admired," she said. "I wanted to be understood." Benedict's throat tightened. "I thought," she continued, voice trembling just slightly, "that perhaps you understood me." "I do," he thought. "Too much. And I am not worthy of it." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Susan." It was the first time he had used her name in daylight, without the cover of the ballroom. The intimacy of it startled both of them. Susan's breath caught. "Yes?" Benedict's control wavered. He could see the faint freckles across her nose. He could see how her lashes trembled, how her mouth was slightly parted as though she were waiting for a truth. He wanted to step closer. He wanted to take her hand. He wanted to do something reckless and honest. Instead, he stepped back. "You must not," he said hoarsely. Susan's brow furrowed. "Must not what?" "Care," Benedict said, the words scraped from somewhere deep. Susan stared. "Care?" "Yes." His voice hardened, as though he could shape truth into safety. "You have come too far to be pulled into my mess." "You think you are a mess," Susan said quietly. "I am," he snapped, then softened. I have a reputation, Susan. I have ruined myself for respectability. You are only now becoming admired. If people think you are tied to me beyond polite acquaintance, they will tear you apart." "I do not care what they think," Susan whispered, fiercer now. "You will," Benedict said, and the bitterness in his voice was not at her, but at himself. "Because you are good, and good people suffer under gossip. He swallowed. "I do not." Susan stepped closer. "Then perhaps you should." The words struck him like a slap and a salvation. He laughed, but it sounded broken. "Do you know what you are asking?" "I know you are not what society says," Susan said. He shook his head. "You have no idea." "Then tell me," she whispered. "Tell me who you are without the rumors." Benedict's hands clenched. His mind filled with things he had never spoken aloud, nights blurred by cards and champagne, careless kisses that meant nothing, the hollow thrill of conquest, the constant fear that if he slowed down, he would have to face the emptiness inside him. He could not put that darkness into Susan's hands. He could not stain her. So he did what he always did. He retreated behind charm. "Miss Grey," he said, making his voice light, "you are becoming dramatic. I had not thought you had such a talent." Her face fell, just slightly. The hurt was small, but it cut. "So you mock me," she said. "I distract you," he corrected, "for your own benefit." Susan's eyes glistened. "Perhaps I do not want distraction." Benedict's chest tightened so painfully he could hardly breathe. "Susan," he whispered, then stopped, because if he said more, he would not be able to stop. She waited. He could not give her what she asked, so he bowed stiffly. "Forgive me. I must attend to my aunt, your aunt." He faltered, then recovered. "Good day." He walked away before he shattered. The rumours began 2 days later. They always did. The ton could not bear a transformation without demanding a price. At first, it was harmless chatter. Miss Grey had improved her wardrobe. Miss Grey had been seen laughing with Lord Benedict. Miss Grey seemed suddenly popular. Then it sharpened. Some whispered that Lord Benedict had taken her as a pet project for amusement. Some suggested he had seduced her, if not physically, then emotionally. Some implied she must be desperate to attach herself to such a notorious man. Susan heard the whispers and tried to pretend she did not. Benedict heard them and felt rage coil like fire beneath his ribs. This was exactly what he had feared. His attention had tainted her. His name had been poured into her life like ink in water, dark, spreading. He confronted a Viscount who had repeated a crude insinuation. The Viscount laughed. "Surely you cannot deny you have been attentive to Miss Grey." Benedict's eyes went cold. "I have been a gentleman to her." "Oh, and that is a novelty for you." Benedict's fist tightened. "Say her name again with that tone, and you will lose the privilege of speaking at all." The Viscount paled, but threats did not kill gossip. They fed it. Benedict began to realize that his presence was the spark. He could not extinguish the fire while standing in the center of it. So he made a decision. He would leave London. He would remove himself from Susan's orbit. He would allow her to shine without his shadow. It was the honourable thing, and it felt like death. On the evening before he planned to depart, Lady Wexford hosted a gathering so crowded it was nearly obscene. Benedict attended because he knew Susan would be there, and he could not bear leaving without seeing her once more. He found her near a window, wearing a gown of deep rose that made her look startlingly alive. Her hair was styled simply, not extravagantly, but in a way that suggested she had learned she did not need ornaments to be beautiful. She looked composed, but when her gaze met Benedict's, something in her eyes flickered, pain and pride entwined. "My lord," she said, curtsying. "Miss Grey." he returned, voice too stiff. They stood in silence, surrounded by music and conversation, as though the world had become a distant thing. At last, Susan said softly, "Are you leaving town?" Benedict's breath caught. "How did you—" "You have been saying goodbyes without words," she replied. Benedict's jaw clenched. "Yes." Susan nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is best." Her calmness was a blow. "Is that what you want?" he demanded. Susan's eyes lifted. "What I want has proved irrelevant." "It has not," Benedict said sharply, then lowered his voice. "Susan, I am doing this for you. And I did not ask you to." Benedict stared, caught. "No." "You decide what is best for me," Susan continued, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "You decide when to help me, when to leave, when to deny what is between us." "There is nothing between us," Benedict lied, too quickly. Susan's face went very still. "Then I am glad you are leaving." He felt the words like a knife. "Susan," he whispered. She turned away. "Good night, my lord." Benedict reached out instinctively, as though to stop her. His fingers hovered in the air, then fell back to his side, powerless. She walked away into the crowd, and Benedict realized with horror that his attempt to protect her might have done the greatest damage of all. He had made her believe she mattered, and then he had treated her feelings as though they did not. He should have chased her. He should have confessed everything. Instead, he stood frozen, watching her disappear, and felt the full weight of his own cowardice. The next morning, Benedict sat in his study, staring at a half-packed trunk and a letter addressed to his steward in the country. London sunlight spilled across the floor, bright and mocking. He had never fled anything in his life. He had charged into scandal with a grin. He had danced with ruin as though it were a partner. But this was different. Because for the first time he wanted something pure, and he feared he would destroy it. A knock sounded. His butler entered, expression odd. "My lord, Miss Grey is here." Benedict went utterly still. "Show her in," he said, voice hoarse. Susan entered a moment later, breathless, cheeks flushed as though she had hurried. In her hand she held a folded paper crushed by tension. "My lord," she said, voice trembling, "there is news." Benedict rose. "What is it?" Susan thrust the note toward him. "Someone has written to my aunt. They claim you compromised me, that you—" Her voice broke. "That you seduced me." Benedict's vision narrowed. "Who?" he demanded, the word sharp as steel. Susan shook her head. "It does not matter. The rumour is everywhere now. My aunt says I must withdraw at once, perhaps return to the country and never show my face again." Benedict's chest burned with fury and guilt. He had done this. He had meant to elevate her, and he had dragged her into mud. Susan's voice was small, but steady. "I came to tell you before you heard it elsewhere, and before you left." Benedict stared at her, at the controlled tremble of her hands, at the shine of tears she refused to let fall. And something inside him snapped. He crossed the room, stopping before her. His voice came out rough, stripped of all charm. "There is something I can do," he said. Susan's eyes lifted, wary. "What?" Benedict took a breath like a man about to step off a cliff. "Marry me." Susan gasped. "My lord!" "It will end it," he said fiercely. "It will silence the rumours. It will protect you." Susan's eyes widened, searching his face. "Is that the only reason?" Benedict's jaw clenched. He looked away as though the truth burned. "It is the practical reason," he said. "And the true one," Susan whispered. Silence stretched between them, heavy as fate. Benedict turned back, and for once his eyes held no mischief, no teasing, no mask at all, only fear and sincerity. "Susan," he said, voice breaking, "I love you." The words fell like thunder. Susan's breath hitched. "I tried not to," Benedict confessed, raw now. "I tried to be what I've always been, careless, untouchable. I told myself I was merely helping you for amusement. But it changed. You changed it. You made me want to be better." His laugh was short and pained. "And do you know what a cruel thing that is? To want better when you are not better. To realize you have built your whole life on being someone women desire but no one respects." Susan's tears finally slipped free. Benedict swallowed hard. "I am not fit for you. I have never been fit for anyone like you." Susan lifted her hand, trembling, and touched his cheek. "Do not decide what I can bear," she whispered. "Do not decide what I deserve." Benedict's eyes closed briefly, as though her touch was both comfort and agony. "Susan," he said, "I would marry you 1,000 times if it meant saving you, but I cannot ask you to carry my reputation as though it were your burden." Susan's fingers curled against his skin. "And if I choose it?" Benedict opened his eyes. Susan's gaze was steady now, fierce beneath the tears. "If I choose you, not because I must, but because I want to, will you still tell me you are unfit?" Benedict's breath shuddered. He sank to one knee as though the floor had demanded it. "Susan Gray," he said, voice low, reverent, "will you marry me, not as a shield against gossip, but as my salvation? Will you allow me the chance to become the man you believed I could be?" Susan's smile trembled through tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Benedict." And in that moment, the notorious Rake discovered a grace he had never earned, freely offered by the only woman who had ever truly seen him. Chapter 4. The Gentleman's Grace. If Lord Benedict Vale's proposal shocked Susan, it shocked London even more. The engagement was announced 3 days later, quickly enough to choke the most venomous rumours, yet not so hurried as to appear panicked. Lady Wexford's drawing room erupted with speculation. Almac's patronesses raised brows. Mammas clutched their pearls and proclaimed Susan either ruined or wildly ambitious. Susan endured it all with a steadiness that surprised even herself. She had once feared attention. Now she understood its true nature. It was noise. It could not define her unless she allowed it. What defined her was the quiet certainty of Benedict's hand in hers when they walked, respectful, but warm. The sincerity in his eyes when he thought no one watched. The way his voice softened when he said her name, yet doubt remained. Not doubt of Benedict's feelings, she could see those too clearly now, but doubt of the world's capacity to permit redemption. Could society allow a Rake to become a gentleman? Or would it forever demand he play the villain? One afternoon, Susan sat with her aunt in their small drawing room, invitations scattered like fallen leaves across the table. Her aunt's expression was guarded. "You are certain," Mrs. Gray said for the 3rd time. Susan met her gaze calmly. "Yes." Mrs. Gray exhaled. "I have never liked him." "I know. He is charming." "Yes. He is dangerous." Susan's mouth softened. "He was." Mrs. Gray narrowed her eyes. "You believe you can change him?" "No," Susan said firmly. "I believe he can change himself, if he wishes it." "And if he does not?" Susan's heart tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Then I will survive. I survived being invisible. I can survive disappointment, but I do not believe he will disappoint me." Mrs. Gray studied her niece for a long moment, then sighed. "You have become stubborn." Susan smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have always been. I simply never had a reason to show it." Her aunt looked startled, then softened. "Very well," she murmured. "If you must marry the man, at least do it with your eyes open." "I am," Susan promised. Benedict, for his part, faced his own battleground. His friends were amused at first. Some congratulated him with grins, already preparing wagers on how long he would endure domesticity. Others were less kind. "You," Lord Ashcombe scoffed. "Marrying? Has someone threatened you?" Benedict's gaze turned icy. "No, I have made a choice." "A choice," another drawled. "Or a rescue. The little wallflower must have trapped you with tears." Benedict's hand tightened around his glass. He set it down carefully. "If you speak of her like that again," he said quietly, "I will break your jaw and then apologize to your mother." There was a pause, then nervous laughter, but Benedict did not laugh. He withdrew from certain circles. He stopped attending late-night gaming parties. He avoided flirtatious entanglements with women who had once been his easy distractions. He began to rise early. He began, almost absurdly, to care about what he did with his hours. It was not easy. Habit clung like smoke. One night, he found himself standing outside a club he had frequented for years, hearing music and laughter spill into the street. His body remembered the thrill of stepping inside, of letting the world blur into pleasure and forgetting. Then Susan's face appeared in his mind, her quiet strength, her steady gaze, the way she had said, "I choose you." Benedict turned away. He went home, and in the privacy of his study, he sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his sister, Lady Eleanor Vale, the one person who had known him before he became a legend. "I am frightened," he wrote. "I have never been frightened of anything. I am frightened of failing her." He sealed it with shaking hands. 2 weeks before the wedding, the ton struck again. A pamphlet appeared, anonymous, crude, gleefully vicious, hinting that Susan Gray's engagement to Benedict Vale was not romantic but necessary. It implied she had been compromised. It implied Benedict was merely doing his duty after a seduction. The implication was a poison that could rot even a marriage. Susan received the pamphlet at a morning call, pressed into her hand by a concerned acquaintance. Her cheeks burned as she read it. She wanted to cry. She wanted to burn it. She wanted to run back into her old invisibility where no one could stab her with words. Instead, she folded the pamphlet neatly, as though it were nothing more than a theatre programme. "That is a malicious thing," said Miss Harrowby, eyes bright with false sympathy. Susan lifted her gaze. "Yes," she said calmly. "How unfortunate for the person who wrote it." Miss Harrowby blinked. "You are not upset?" Susan's smile was gentle and lethal. "No. I am certain the author must be deeply unhappy to find joy in cruelty." The words were quiet. They landed like a slap. Miss Harrowby coloured and turned away. Susan's hands shook only when she was alone later. That evening, Benedict arrived at Susan's house, eyes blazing. He had heard. He found Susan in the drawing room, sitting very straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Susan," he said, voice tight, "I am sorry." Susan looked up. "Do not apologize for the wickedness of others." Benedict paced. "This is my fault, my past, my reputation." "No," Susan interrupted, firm. "It is not your fault that they choose to be cruel. It is not your fault that you lived as you did before you knew better." Benedict stopped, staring at her. Susan rose slowly and stepped closer. "You will not undo your past by punishing yourself. You will undo it by living differently." Benedict's throat tightened. "And if they never let me forget?" Susan's eyes were steady. "Then let them remember. Let them remember that Lord Benedict Vale chose to be honourable when it mattered." Benedict's breath shuddered. He reached for her hands, holding them carefully. "You have more courage than I do," he whispered. Susan shook her head. "No. I have simply endured being dismissed for so long that I no longer fear it. But you," her voice softened, "you have always been noticed. And now you must endure being judged." Benedict looked at her as though seeing her anew. "You teach me," he said quietly. Susan's mouth curved. "You taught me first." Benedict lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, reverent. "Then let us teach each other," he murmured, "for the rest of our lives." Susan's heart thudded. "Yes," she whispered. The wedding took place in a small church, not grand enough to satisfy the gossip-hungry, but dignified enough to silence those who expected spectacle. The pews were filled with curious faces, some kind, some merely hungry for drama. Susan arrived on her aunt's arm. Her gown was simple ivory satin, cut elegantly. She carried no extravagant jewels, only a small locket that had belonged to her mother. Her steps were steady. At the altar, Benedict waited. He looked different, not merely dressed differently, though his coat was impeccable, but held differently. He stood as though aware of his own worth, not based on charm, but on intention. When Susan reached him, Benedict's gaze softened with such visible devotion that even the most cynical onlookers fell momentarily silent. Susan placed her hand in his. His fingers trembled. The vows were spoken, traditional, solemn, binding. Benedict's voice held steady until he said, "With all that I am, I take you." Susan's breath caught. She answered, clear and sure. When the clergyman pronounced them husband and wife, Benedict exhaled as though he had been holding his breath his entire life. Outside the church, the sunlight was bright, the air crisp. People whispered, of course they did, but Susan no longer feared whispers. Benedict took her hand and guided her down the steps. As they reached the carriage, Susan glanced up at him. "Are you well?" Benedict's mouth curved. "No." Susan's eyes widened. "No?" He leaned closer, voice low so only she could hear. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am unworthy. And I am happier than I have ever been." Susan's eyes glistened. "Good." Benedict laughed softly. "Good?" "Yes," Susan said, squeezing his hand. "Because if you were not terrified, you might not understand what a precious thing this is." Benedict looked at her, really looked, as he had that first night in Lady Fernham's ballroom. "You saved me," he said, voice thick. Susan shook her head. "No, you saved yourself. I only offered my hand." Benedict lifted that hand and kissed it again, as though he could not help himself. As they climbed into the carriage, a final murmur rose from the crowd, speculation, judgment, envy, awe. Susan turned her head toward the window, watching London blur past. Once she had wanted to be invisible. Once she had believed that was safety. Now she understood. Safety was not invisibility. Safety was being loved and chosen, even when the world tried to deny one's worth. Benedict's hand found hers on the seat. His thumb brushed her knuckles, small, reassuring. "Tell me," he murmured, "did I succeed in making you the toast of the season?" Susan smiled, slow and radiant. "No." Benedict's brow lifted. "No?" She turned, meeting his eyes with all the quiet courage she had discovered. "You did something far better," she whispered. "You made me believe I mattered even when no one looked. And then you looked." Benedict's breath caught. Susan's smile softened. "You made me happy." Benedict pulled her hand to his chest, pressing it there as though to anchor himself. "And you," he said, voice low and steady, "have made me a gentleman." Outside, London continued to chatter, but inside the carriage, in the space between their joined hands, there was only grace, hard-won, freely given, and finally, undeniably theirs. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.